Sub-Saharan Africa has an issue. People aren't using enough fertilizer. While high-income countries like the United States, Germany, France, Japan, and the UK have approximately 1 to 3% of their population as farmers, Africa has an estimated 60% of their population in subsistence farming. Fertilizer results in less people in rural farms to feed the population, which means more people to work in factories. Many African countries cannot industrialize and lift its population out of poverty without more people using fertilizer. Traditional economists see the problem as market-related. Supply: fertilizer may not easily be available. Demand: farmers don't know that fertilizer increases crop yield and don't want it. Or it's just frankly too expensive due to infrastructure problems such as a lack of roads. However, when we dig deeper, we find that fertilizer is widely available, appreciated, and affordable in sub-Saharan Africa. Western Kenyan maize farmers who use fertilizers see a 36% increase in take-home income. Another way to think about it is, if the average person in the world works 50 weeks a year, fertilizer use would be the equivalent of being given 13 weeks off. It's no surprise that 97% of surveyed farmers indicated they would use fertilizer for their next crop. What baffles economists is that, despite all this, only 37% of those surveyed farmers end up using fertilizer. Many economists have dug in and argued that more education, more supply, more subsidies, better transportation infrastructure are what's needed. Yet, for decades, despite these interventions, fertilizer use remains low. What could possibly be the reason why people aren't using fertilizer? Is there just no solution? Are these sub-Saharan African countries cursed to remain as mostly pre-industrial agrarian economies? Well, when behavioral economists looked into why sub-Saharan farmers weren't using fertilizer, they decided on a new approach. What if it wasn't the market at fault? What if the problem was human? As humans, we procrastinate repeatedly. We often think that future me would clean the house, go to the gym, study harder, work harder, while present me would relax until tomorrow comes. When tomorrow comes, we're just as lazy as we were the day before. Farmers, like everyone else, can be lazy. Going to the market to buy fertilizer is painful, both economically and time-wise. Farmers predominantly plan to do it in the future and end up too busy once planting season arrives. At the same time, farmers tend to only see 2, maybe 3 big paydays a year when harvests come in. When crops are harvested, farmers are rich with cash. While farmers have the self-control to stretch their budgets out through the winter, by the time it's planting season, the money to buy fertilizer is no longer there. Behavioral economists made a simple solution to these two problems. Why not deliver the fertilizer to farmers? Farmers no longer had to travel to the fertilizer market. They would also be committing savings or a prepayment to pay for the fertilizer well ahead of planting season. It turns out, this model is not only great for the farmer, it's great for the fertilizer business. Having fertilizer deliveries provided consistent customers, reduced costs to retail and store fertilizer, and incentivized investment. With a dedicated job to delivering the fertilizer to thousands, it started to make sense to invest in things like trucks to haul the fertilizer. With this simple intervention, fertilizer use was up 70%. Not only that, home-delivered fertilizer was 10% cheaper. To give you a better sense of how incredible this solution is, a similar effect can be achieved with a costly subsidy covering 50% of the cost of the fertilizer. So what does this example say about traditional economics and behavioral economics? Traditional economics tends to look at people as rational actors who can perfectly act on their intentions. They see the larger market as rational and logical. However, human beings are irrational and flawed. With markets made up of human beings, it's not surprising that it too can be irrational and flawed. For example, too little fertilizer can be a bad thing, but too much fertilizer can cause harm too. For rice farmers, overusing fertilizer significantly decreases crop yield. It sounds reasonable that if farmers understood that too much fertilizer use can decrease rice yields, it should fix the problem, right? Wrong. For the most part, educating farmers wasn't effective. Despite learning about fertilizer overuse, many rice farmers continued to overuse fertilizer. Here's where behavioral economics comes in. You see, the issue wasn't that the farmers didn't know that fertilizer overuse was harmful. It's that they thought they were an exception or the information was just wrong. Plants grow slowly, and people who have their entire livelihoods linked to their crop success tend to closely watch their crops' growth and health. health. Behavioral economists notice that farmers mentally associate green leafy growth with a healthier and higher yielding crop. While this is true for spinach, it's false for most grains. After a certain point, an increase in an inedible green leafy growth results in lower edible rice grain yields. For this reason, when they stopped using as much fertilizer and saw less green leafy growth, they would assume that either the harvest was particularly bad and needed more fertilizer, that their land was worse than the average and needed more fertilizer, or that the information provided was false. What traditional economics doesn't recognize, that behavioral economics does, is that people can draw false conclusions. In this case, economists misdiagnose the problem. The issue is not education on fertilizer overuse. The issue is our mental model of plant health and crop yield. Behavioral economics is also revolutionizing how we design solutions. Small businesses require a lot of financial literacy. While you would think that greater financial literacy would improve the performance of small businesses, this isn't the case. There was no difference between those who took a long and difficult class on financial literature and those who didn't. From a traditional economic perspective, the solution was simple: a lack of interest or motivation, not enough classes or attendance, or more comprehensive training. And that's what economists did. They incentivized attendance and performance, increased course length, and covered more material. The results were the same: no change in profitability. The problem is kind of obvious now, but eluded economists for ages. We're not beings of infinite cognitive capacity, able to sit through long and complex courses on finance and business, able to absorb and perfectly apply every little bit of detail. Even if we could, when it comes down to it, even for the simple and mundane problems, we tend not to apply our knowledge. When our genius minds are staring at 2 containers of the same product at the grocery store, trying to do the simple math on whether the regular size or the large size is the better value, we can't or are too lazy to do it and just pick the one we usually always do. We're lazy in applying that knowledge for the 4 to 5 seconds it's needed, even when there's a tangible financial gain. People cannot process complex information quickly and effortlessly. It costs cognitive resources, and those resources are limited. We tend to limit how much we have to think when we don't have to. Recognizing this, behavioral economists opted to teach simpler, faster, and intuitive solutions, teaching rough rules of thumb that didn't require much effort or thought, habits like separating business and personal expenses. When they did this, they found large increases in the adoption and use of good financial practices and a jump in profitability. In conclusion, economics is going through a revolution at the moment. A new wave of research in behavioral economics is recognizing new problems and designing solutions that take advantage of our irrationality as human beings. The amazing part is, many of these solutions solve long-standing issues while barely having any cost to them at all. For example, when people in the US were presented with a checkbox that said, check this box not to enroll in a savings plan for retirement, versus check this box to enroll in a savings plan for retirement, people in both scenarios wouldn't check the box. Those who were asked to check the box not to enroll saved 40% more for retirement. While decades of economists have advocated around creating new types of retirement savings accounts and tax policies to incentivize retirement, this simple change may go down in history as one of the most effective methods for getting people to save for retirement and reducing poverty in old age. We're also starting to identify new problems and create solutions to those problems. While economists have been focusing on improving access to costly medication, behavioral economists have been focusing on people actually taking the medication. In the United States, close to 100,000 people have their limbs amputated each year due to not taking their diabetes medication. Not because they can't afford it, but because they forget. And if preventing losing a limb or death is not enough of an incentive to get us to take a minute out of our days to take medication, it's hard to say what rational incentives, financial or otherwise, will make a difference. So, no matter how much economic policies see us as rational, if those policies don't recognize our inherent irrationality and cater to our behavior, they may just fail. But a world in which we do recognize our irrational behavior and use behavioral economics may be the key to another economic revolution, not only for the world's poorest, but for everyone. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing or contributing to my Patreon. I'll be posting at least once a week with interesting videos on psychology and behavioral economics, so I definitely suggest subscribing if you haven't already.